Thank you. Just a little aside, I know the website says I'm a Tacoma native, and I am, but I was a Sacramentan from 1981 to 1985. And I haven't been back since, so it's a wonderful, wonderful homecoming for me. I hope we can turn the lights down a little. Boy, are we picky here today or what? It's too cold, it's too this, that. Because I really want to see you. I was going to ask for Klingons, but this will work. Before we talk about D, since this is the 40th anniversary of Star Trek, I don't know how many of you were actually in the audience on the night Star Trek premiered in 1966. I was one of them. And that carbon dates us, I know. But I think in order to truly appreciate what Star Trek meant to my generation, we were teenagers at the time, I think we need a brief look back because an awful lot of people weren't here then. Star Trek premiered during a time when the United States was pretty close to coming apart at the seams. Thanks to downright scandalous racial injustices, the Vietnam War was tearing the place apart. There was college campus unrest and violence. There just wasn't anything going terribly right at all in the United States when Star Trek premiered. Not long before it premiered, we had just barely survived the Cuban Missile Crisis. Then there was the assassination of President Kennedy. And in the midst of the series' first run, in 1968, we suffered the additional assassinations of Robert Kennedy, who was then a candidate for president, and of Martin Luther King, who is really the blacks' only hope for a peaceful end to a struggle for equal opportunity that had gone on for more than 100 years. It was into this scenario that Star Trek premiered in 1966. Okay. Okay, into this nightmare of a pressure cooker stepped Gene Roddenberry's science fiction series Star Trek, peopled by a cohesive and mutually supportive, multiracial and multinational group of people, including a green-blooded, pointy-eared Vulcan. These people got along a whole lot better than we seemed to be doing at the time. As I began to watch the series, I think an awful lot of them just began to have some hope for the future, that we weren't all going to end up in a pile of rubble at some point. So Star Trek really was, it was just something to hold on to at a time when we just weren't even sure we were going to see the year 2000 roll around. As I watched the series, it was just like, okay, we're going to survive. It's going to happen. And of course, additionally, the lifelong friends that I have made as a result of being a Star Trek fan are legion. There are people I now know from all over the world that I would not otherwise have met or even cared very much about. Now when we have a crisis in the Middle East, I know Star Trekkers over there who are actually going to war, who are doing these things, and it's just like the world has become something that I care about globally more than I ever did before. And I think Star Trek was very much a part of that. So I think you should be really, really proud to have been in on that beginning and to have the feelings that we have for it. I know a lot of the rest of the culture thinks we're kind of way out there, but when you think about all of the technological advances that have happened as a result of Star Trek, I mean, these cell phones, this was invented by a guy who watched Star Trek, and he says, I think everybody should have one of these. And now everybody has one of these except me. I won't take one of those. So, but additionally, of course, another really, really wonderful reason that Star Trek is special to me is that in 1968, I was offered the wonderful privilege of meeting DeForest Kelley. I didn't know what to make of him because, at first, before I met him, because I had seen these tiffs with Spock, and I had seen his roles as a Rowdy Cowboy. And he was if you have not seen his roles as a Rowdy Cowboy, you need to see his roles as a Rowdy Cowboy. You will not believe it's the same man. And you'll have to divorce yourself from the McCoy thing in order to do that. But he was a really scary dude. Okay? So, as it turned out, in 1968, he was going to be at the Apple Blossom Festival in Wenatchee, Washington. And I thought, well, I'm going to drive across the state and just watch him go by, because I love Star Trek. So I went over there, and I parked the car, and I was heading toward the parade route. And it turned out that the limousine that was going to carry them in the parade route was parked at a curb. And I went, yes. So I kind of loitered shamelessly, just window shopping. And about 20 minutes later, Dee and Carolyn came out and got into the car. And I was regarding them, and fans were walking up to him, and I was holding back, because again, I didn't know how he would handle that kind of an intrusion. I didn't know if I really had DeForest Kelley or if I had, Toby Jack Saunders. I mean, I didn't know if he was going to appreciate that. So I just stayed back and I listened and I watched, and very, very quickly it became very clear to me that he was a very, very nice man. So I screwed up my courage, and I walked up and I asked him, may I have your autograph? And he said, of course. And he and Carolyn both very graciously received me. After the parade was over, I drove home in this cocoon of warmth for this man. And I thought, I've just never met anybody like him. I mean, he's a star, but he is so approachable and so warm and so appreciative of his fans. And there was a creative writing article due in my class, and I thought, well, I'll write an essay called The Real McCoy. Wasn't that clever? So I wrote this article called The Real McCoy, and I gave it to my teacher, and he said, Kris, this is really, really good. I think you should send a copy to Mr. Kelley. And I went, whoa, I don't write to movie stars. He goes, look, if you impress somebody as obviously as he impressed you, wouldn't you want to know? And I said, well, yeah, but he's an actor. He probably hears that like 10 times a day. He just basically pulled rank on me and said, send it. And I thought, he puts on the back of your report card, citizenship, how she obeys, the whole 9 yards. So I'm like, all right, teacher said. So I sent it off, and I thought, his secretary will see it. It's okay, you can send it. His secretary will see it, no big deal. His secretary was his wife. And she said, Dee, you need to look at this. And they were both so impressed by it that they sent it to TV Star Parade, a New York magazine, suggesting that it might make a good article. So he wrote back to me to say that they wanted to publish my essay on him. My parents had to peel me off the ceiling. I had always wanted to be a writer, but my mom and dad had always told me, keep your feet on the ground, keep your head in the clouds. Just get your head out of the clouds. You're going to starve to death as a writer. You can't possibly survive as a writer. Leon Uris has a following. James Michener has a following, but you're just, you need to get some other skills, girl. So then DeForest Kelley comes along and says, you're a writer. And I mean, it was enormously, enormously positive to me. And it just basically gave me the encouragement to feel that I really could string words together that people would want to read. And I started submitting articles, and I started becoming very, very, well-known nationally in newspapers and magazines and stuff. So 20 years later, oh, by the way, when the first article came out, when the article that Dee wrote came out, I wrote him again to thank him for launching my writing career, and he wrote back and saying he hoped that this article would make me a celebrity in my own right in my hometown. And I was going to write him again, and Mom said, Kris, the man has been very kind to you. Don't drive him nuts with your incessant letters. I had about 20 pen pals at the time, and I figured she was right, so I stopped writing for 18 years. So the 20th anniversary of Star Trek comes around, and Dee was going to appear in Spokane at a 20th anniversary Star Trek convention. And I thought, I really owe this man a very long overdue thank you for having launched my writing career. So I pull out this piece of paper, and I address it to Paramount, and I said, I owe you a long overdue hug for launching my writing career. I hope to see you again in Spokane. And I sent it off. Well, as soon as I did that, I felt like an idiot. I thought, the man is an icon these days, Kris. I owe you a long overdue hug? Have you lost every marble you ever had? You know, so I was just spinning out of, I was thinking, I better not go. That was way over the edge. I almost talked myself out of going, but then I thought, well, I told him I'd be there, and what if he looks for me? But he's not gonna do that, you know, and I just went back and forth like this, like for days, and then finally I said, well, I'll go over. And I had a little 11-year-old nephew at the time. He wanted to go. So I thought, and I'd never been to a Star Trek convention. And what I knew of Star Trek conventions was what the news media shows. And I thought,